The doctor had barely finished speaking when my mother looked at my newborn daughter and said something I'll never forget. "We can't take her." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. 3 days earlier, I'd nearly died in a car accident. I was lying in a hospital bed with broken ribs, a fractured shoulder, and enough pain medication in my system to make everything feel like a dream. My baby girl had been delivered prematurely during emergency surgery. She weighed less than 4 pounds. She was fighting for her life in the neonatal intensive care unit. And all I was asking was for my parents to help. Not forever. Not even for very long. Just until I recovered. But they refused. And what I didn't know then was that their refusal had nothing to do with my daughter. It had everything to do with a secret they were desperate to keep buried. A secret so dangerous that someone may have tried to kill me. And the person who finally exposed the truth wasn't a lawyer, an investigator, or a police officer. It was my grandfather. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Nora Alice, and this is the story of how losing everything helped me discover who truly loved me. The rain had been falling for hours that night. The kind of storm that turns every road into a river and every set of headlights into a blurry glow. I remember gripping the steering wheel and trying to focus. I wasn't supposed to be driving in weather like that, especially not 7 months pregnant. But I couldn't wait any longer. For weeks, something had been bothering me. I worked as an accountant for a regional construction company. Numbers had always made sense to me. People often lied. Numbers usually didn't. A few weeks earlier, while reviewing some financial records connected to a business partnership involving my fiancé Ryan Holt, I noticed several transactions that didn't add up. At first, I assumed they were bookkeeping mistakes. Then I started digging. The deeper I looked, the stranger things became. Money seemed to disappear from one account and reappear somewhere else. Payments were being routed through companies that barely existed. Large sums were moving around without clear explanations. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I knew enough to be concerned. That night, I was driving to meet someone who claimed they could explain everything. I never made it there. Traffic slowed as I approached a sharp curve outside Columbus. I pressed the brake pedal. Nothing happened. My stomach dropped. I pushed harder. Still nothing. The pedal sank all the way to the floor. Panic exploded through my chest. I pumped the brakes again and again. Nothing. The car kept moving. Faster. Faster. Out of control. I remember screaming. I remember trying to avoid another vehicle. I remember seeing a guardrail. Then I heard metal tearing apart. Glass shattered around me, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I thought I was dead. Bright lights filled my vision. Machines beeped nearby. Every inch of my body hurt. A nurse noticed I was awake and rushed over. "You've been unconscious for 3 days," she said gently. 3 days. Couldn't believe it. My first thought wasn't about the accident. It wasn't about the pain. It wasn't even about Ryan. It was about my baby. "My daughter," I whispered. The nurse smiled. "She's alive." The relief hit me so hard that I started crying. The baby had been delivered during emergency surgery. She arrived almost 2 months early. But she survived. I survived. At that moment, that was all that mattered. Or so I thought. A few hours later, Ryan arrived. He rushed into the room carrying flowers. His eyes looked tired. His smile looked forced. At first, I blamed stress. After all, his pregnant fiancée had nearly died. Anyone would be shaken. But something felt different. Every time I mentioned the accident, he changed the subject. Every time I asked questions, his answers seemed rushed. And every time I looked directly into his eyes, he looked away first. I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I was emotional. Maybe I was looking for problems where none existed. But deep down, something felt wrong. Then came the problem I couldn't ignore. The doctors explained that my recovery would take months. I wouldn't be able to lift anything heavy. I couldn't drive. I would need physical therapy. And most importantly, I couldn't properly care for a newborn on my own. Ryan claimed he wanted to help, but his business required travel. At least that's what he said. So I did the one thing I never imagined I'd need to do. I called my parents. Growing up, my relationship with them had always been complicated. Grant and Diane Ellis believed success solved everything. Good grades, good jobs, good appearances. As long as everything looked perfect, they were happy. But vulnerability made them uncomfortable. Neediness irritated them. Weakness embarrassed them. Still, they were my parents. And Lily was their granddaughter. Surely they would help. When they arrived at the hospital the next day, I immediately explained the situation. I asked if Lily could stay with them temporarily until I recovered. The room became quiet. My father exchanged a glance with my mother. Then my mother folded her arms. "We can't do that." First, I thought she was joking. "What? We can't raise a baby," she replied. "It's only temporary," I said. My father shook his head. "We already raised our children." I stared at them in disbelief. "She's your granddaughter." Neither of them responded. The silence hurt more than any injury from the crash. I felt tears filling my eyes. Not because they were saying no, but because they didn't seem to care. There was no sadness, no regret, no hesitation, just cold indifference. And then they stood up to leave. As they reached the door, my father turned back and said something that confused me even more. "We'll come back tomorrow. There are some documents we need you to sign." Documents? What documents? Before I could ask another question, they were gone. And as the door closed behind them, I had no idea that their strange behavior was only the beginning. Because within days, investigators would tell me something that changed everything. My accident may not have been an accident at all. The next morning, 2 investigators arrived at my hospital room. One introduced himself as Detective Miller. The other was a transportation safety specialist assigned to review serious vehicle accidents. At first, I assumed they were simply gathering information. Then Detective Miller closed the door behind him. His expression immediately made me nervous. "Ms. Alice," he said, "we've completed a preliminary inspection of your vehicle." I swallowed hard. "And?" He exchanged a glance with his colleague. "The brake system didn't fail naturally." For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" The specialist opened a folder. "There are signs that the brake lines were deliberately damaged before the crash." The room suddenly felt colder. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Are you saying someone did this on purpose?" "We're saying we cannot rule it out." The words echoed inside my head. Someone may have wanted me dead. I thought about my unborn daughter. I thought about the guardrail. I thought about how close we had both come to dying. Then I thought about the financial records I'd been investigating. A chill ran down my spine. Before leaving, Detective Miller handed me his card. "If you remember anything unusual from the weeks before the accident, call me." After they left, I sat motionless. Someone had tampered with my car. The question was why? And more importantly, who? That evening Ryan arrived carrying coffee and flowers. The moment he sat down, I told him everything. I expected anger, shock, concern. Instead, he frowned. "There must be some mistake." I blinked. "What?" "Investigators jump to conclusions all the time." His response surprised me. "They found damaged brake lines. I'm sure there's another explanation." His tone was almost defensive. Immediately, for the next 10 minutes, he continued offering excuses. Vehicle wear, mechanical problems, bad inspections. When he finally left, a troubling thought entered my mind. Why was he working so hard to convince me nothing happened? A few days later, my parents returned. This time they carried folders. Several folders. My father placed them on the bedside table. "We need your signature." I looked down. Legal documents, trust paperwork, property forms. My confusion grew. What does any of this have to do with my recovery? It needs to be handled. Right now. Yes. I stared at him. I could barely sit upright without pain medication. My daughter was still in intensive care, and somehow they were worried about paperwork. Something wasn't right. For the first time, I refused. I'm not signing anything until I've reviewed it properly. A flash of irritation crossed my father's face. It disappeared almost instantly, but I saw it, and that moment stayed with me, because it wasn't disappointment. It was frustration, like I'd interrupted a plan. 3 nights later, everything changed. I had just returned from seeing Lily in the neonatal unit. The nurses had finally allowed me to hold her for nearly an hour. She was tiny, fragile, perfect. For the first time since the crash, I felt hopeful. As I settled into bed, I heard voices outside my room. My parents. The door wasn't fully closed. Normally, I would have ignored them. Then I heard my father's voice rise. "You told me this wouldn't happen." My mother's response was sharp. How was I supposed to know she'd survive? Every muscle in my body froze. My breath caught in my throat. Survive? What did that mean? The argument continued. Most of it was difficult to hear, but certain phrases reached me clearly. Trust fund. Records. Ryan. Money. Exposure. Risk. My stomach twisted. I listened as long as I could. By the time their footsteps disappeared down the hallway, one thing had become clear. My parents were terrified. Not of losing me. Not of helping Lily. They were terrified of something being discovered. And somehow Ryan was connected to it. That night I barely slept. Questions flooded my mind. Had they been lying to me for years? Was Ryan involved? And if they were all connected, who had sabotaged my car? The answer arrived sooner than expected. For days later, an elderly man walked through my hospital door. At first, I didn't recognize him. Then I saw his eyes. Bright blue. Sharp. Familiar. Grandpa. A smile spread across his weathered face. Walter Alice. The man my parents spent years calling difficult. The man they slowly pushed out of family gatherings. The man I hadn't seen in nearly 6 years. Tears filled my eyes. He crossed the room slowly, leaning on a cane. Then he took my hand. I came as soon as I heard. Those 6 words contained more love than anything my parents had shown me since the accident. For nearly an hour we talked about Lily, my recovery, old memories, childhood summers, fishing trips, birthday parties, moments I'd nearly forgotten. Then his expression changed. The warmth disappeared. Concern replaced it. "Nora," he said quietly, "there are things you need to know." A knot formed in my stomach. He reached into his coat pocket and removed an envelope. Inside were copies of financial records, property documents, business filings, years of paperwork. "I've been keeping these for a long time." I stared at him. "What are they?" "Evidence." The word landed like a hammer. My grandfather explained that years earlier he began noticing irregularities involving family assets and business transactions. Whenever questions arose, records disappeared. Whenever concerns were raised, explanations followed. Too many explanations. Eventually he started making copies, just in case. Then came the revelation that changed everything. According to Grandpa, my parents weren't merely hiding money. They were protecting an entire network of fraudulent transactions. And Ryan's business had been involved for years. I felt physically sick. "No." Grandpa nodded slowly. "I'm afraid so." The room spun around me. The man I planned to marry. The parents I'd spent my entire life trying to please. All connected. Then Grandpa said something that sent chills down my spine. "After your accident, I started asking questions." He paused. "And Nora, your name came up." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "A source told me there were concerns about what you had discovered before the crash." The room fell silent. For the first time, I spoke the fear I'd been carrying. "You think someone wanted to stop me?" Grandpa didn't answer immediately. Finally, he looked me directly in the eyes. "I think someone became afraid of what you knew." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his jacket again. This time he removed a small key. The brass looked old, worn. Attached to it was a faded tag. "What's that?" His voice dropped. "The reason I came." He placed the key in my hand. "A safe deposit box." My pulse quickened. "I've kept it hidden for nearly 20 years. Inside," he explained, "were documents nobody else knew existed. Original records, personal notes, evidence he'd collected quietly for decades. Enough, he believed, to expose everything." As I stared down at the key resting in my palm, I realized something. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't alone. Someone believed me. Someone was willing to fight beside me. And for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt determination. Because if my parents, Ryan, and everyone connected to them thought I would stay silent, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. After months of fear, confusion, and confrontation, the silence almost seemed unreal. For years, my life had been filled with other people's expectations, their opinions, their demands, their version of the truth. Now, for the first time, I could finally hear my own thoughts. Legal proceedings continued in the background. Investigators reviewed documents. Attorneys handled paperwork. Questions that had remained hidden for years were finally being answered. But something inside me had changed. I no longer woke up thinking about proving anything. I no longer worried about defending myself. The truth had already done that. One afternoon, Seth stopped by my apartment carrying takeout and coffee. A year earlier, I never would have imagined us sitting together like that. We talked for hours. Not about investigations. Not about money. Just life. Childhood memories. Things we misunderstood about each other. The people we hoped to become. For the first time, we were building a relationship based on honesty instead of family expectations. And that felt like a gift. But the person I thought about most during those months was Grandpa. Walter's health continued to decline. Some days he seemed almost like his old self. Other days, simply walking across a room exhausted him. Yet every time he saw Lily, his face lit up. One warm afternoon, we sat together on a park bench overlooking a small pond. Lily slept peacefully in her stroller beside us. Grandpa watched her for several minutes before speaking. "You know," he said quietly, "most people spend their whole lives repeating what came before them." I looked over. He was staring at the water. The same mistakes. The same fears. The same damage. I nodded. Then he turned toward me. "But you didn't." His eyes filled with emotion. "You broke the cycle." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The words hit me harder than I expected. Because deep down, I realized he was right. My greatest victory wasn't exposing corruption. It wasn't uncovering lies. It wasn't winning arguments. It was choosing a different future for my daughter. A future built on honesty, on love, on trust. A future where she would never have to earn affection by being perfect. A future where she would know she was enough exactly as she was. Several months later, Grandpa passed away peacefully. The call came early in the morning. Even though I knew it was coming, the loss felt overwhelming. For a long time, I sat quietly holding Lily while tears rolled down my face. The world suddenly felt smaller without him in it. But alongside the grief was gratitude. Because without Walter, I never would have found the courage to face the truth. He had given me something no inheritance could ever match. He taught me to trust myself. And that gift changed everything. A year later, life looked completely different. Lily was healthy and thriving. The tiny premature baby who once fit inside my arms now ran through the backyard chasing butterflies and asking endless questions. Our small house sat at the end of a quiet street surrounded by trees and flower gardens. Most of our neighbors knew nothing about our past. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Some stories belong in the past. One afternoon, I stood in the garden while Lily laughed nearby. The sun was shining. The air smelled like fresh flowers. And for the first time in a very long time, there were no secrets waiting to be uncovered. No battles left to fight. No fear lurking around the corner. Only peace. Real peace. The kind that comes after surviving a storm you never thought you'd escape. As I watched Lily run across the grass, I thought about everything we'd endured. The accident, the betrayal, the lies, the heartbreak, and I realized something important. If I could go back and change everything, I wouldn't, because every painful step had led us here. To this moment, to this life, to this future. A future built not on what was taken from us, but on what we chose to become. And as Lily reached for my hand and smiled up at me, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, we were finally free. So let me ask you, if you discovered the people closest to you had been hiding the truth for years, would you expose them or walk away? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories just like this one.